I'm going to share 3 specific scenarios that will instantly show you whether you're an INFP 4 or an INFP 9. These aren't vague personality descriptions or abstract concepts. They're real-world situations that every INFP faces, and your response pattern will reveal your core type with absolute clarity. So if you're struggling between the 2 types, this is exactly what you need to finally understand yourself. The anger test. How you handle frustration reveals everything. You're in a meeting and someone completely dismisses your idea without even listening to it fully. They interrupt you halfway through, they wave their hand, say, no, that's not gonna work. And before moving on to the next agenda item, you've already felt like you've been shut down. So the INFP 9 feels that familiar knot in their stomach, but stays quiet. Maybe they force a smile. Maybe they're thinking that this is keeping the peace. They might nod along in whatever direction that the meeting takes, even though inside they're feeling completely dismissed and frustrated. I often say, it's not going to kill me, I'll be fine, and just suck it up and move on. Meanwhile, the 4 INFP might not explode in the moment, but they're actually cataloging exactly what felt wrong and why it mattered. They're noting the dismissive tone, the fact that their perspective wasn't even heard, and how it connects to this larger pattern of their voice being overlooked or unheard. The 9 goes home and vents about it, maybe to their partner, maybe gets really frustrated to themselves, punches a wall or something like that, hits a pillow, hits themselves perhaps, and they're venting about that person, how that person made them feel. Maybe they'll talk about how rude the interruption was, or how the idea actually had merit, but they just weren't listened to. But they never actually bring it up again at work. They've released this pressure. They've come home, they've opened up the pressure valve, right? And now they're ready to move forward and maintain harmony again in the workplace. Us INFP 9s really have a strength in shutting down heavy emotions. Now, that emotion has to go somewhere, but it doesn't often come out in a productive way. Now, the INFP 4 finds a way to address it later. Maybe not confrontationally, but they find a moment to approach that person, to follow up one-on-one, to send a follow-up email maybe with their complete thoughts. They just can't let it go. It's attached to their authenticity and that their perspective deserves to be heard. I've heard experts say that 9s often underdo anger. They go to sleep, right? They let it leak out passively. For us 9s, at least from my opinion, my experience, it feels like if that anger comes out, then we don't know what's going to happen. So the fear for us is disrupting harmony. The 4's response comes from a completely different place entirely. They're not trying to create conflict, of course, but they're trying to make sure that their authentic perspective is witnessed. They can't pretend that something didn't happen when it clearly affected them. It's about this authentic perspective that they feel has been erased or treated like it doesn't matter. So right now, think about the last time that you were interrupted or dismissed. Did you file it away and vent it at home later? Or did you find a way to address it with the actual person? Which was your first instinct? Now, neither one of them are wrong or bad. They're just how we process. Here's scenario 2. A friend keeps canceling plans with you last minute, and it's becoming a pattern. You've made dinner reservations, you've cleared your evening, maybe even turned down other invitations to spend time with that person. Then, 2 hours before you're supposed to meet, you get a text saying that something came up and they just can't make it, they can't come through. And this is the 3rd time in 2 months. So this is where another fundamental difference comes into play between the 4s and the 9s. So the INFP 9s start making excuses for their friend. Maybe they're just going through some stress at work. Maybe it's not that big of a deal because you didn't really have concrete plans anyway. Or the 9's first impulse is to find reasons why this behavior makes sense and why maintaining this understanding of the other person is more important than actually addressing the impact. When a friend suggests making plans again, the 9 might say yes, but maybe doesn't make firm reservations. right? They accommodate the inconsistency rather than actually naming it as a problem that needs to be solved. And the INFP4 feels the sting of being deprioritized and recognizes this as a pattern that needs addressing. It's not just about the canceled plans. It's about what those cancellations communicate about the value of the relationship and their place in this person's priorities. This was a big lesson for me as a 9 in the dating game. I had to understand that if somebody turned me down, that I should take that as a sign that I'm just not a priority in their life right now. And that is what it is. They don't necessarily confront the other person aggressively. They name what's happening and they talk about it. A 4 might say something like, I've noticed that this keeps happening and it affects me, and is making plans with me a priority for you or not? I don't think I have ever been that bold to say something like that. The 4's response comes from recognizing that authentic relationships require honest conversations about what is and what isn't working. The 9 thinks that being flexible and understanding the other person, giving leeway to them, will help preserve that friendship and thus maintaining a place in the world for the 9 to exist. So they're not discarded or thrown away, that they have a place, a group that they can blend in with. And the 4 thinks that addressing problems directly will actually strengthen the friendship, likely by making it more real and more honest. It shows up as accommodation that breeds this quiet resentment and this feeling of, am I even worthy? The 9 keeps saying yes to plans while internally building frustration about their friend's unreliability. Maybe they'll mention the annoyance every once in a while, maybe to somebody else. Maybe it'll slip out in passive-aggressive ways in a conversation, but it's often in hopes that the other person will pick up on it and do something about it without actually having direct confrontation. So if your default is to keep rearranging your schedule to preserve the friendship or to make excuses, then maybe that leans into 9. And if your default is to ask whether this actually reflects actual priorities, then you'd be leaning into the 4. But there is one scenario that shows an even deeper, clearer understanding between the 4s and the 9s and your deepest fears. So imagine that you're in a group where everyone's agreeing with something that you fundamentally disagree with. This is where the core fears of each type collide with reality and force a choice that reveals everything about who you really are and which Enneagram type you are. Maybe it's a family dinner where everyone's making assumptions that doesn't sit right with you. Maybe they want to exclude someone from the group, or they're making jokes that cross the line and you just can't uncross those. So the INFP 9's fear of conflict really kicks in hard. We worry that speaking up will create this tension and potentially it'll damage the relationships, and then we won't have those relationships to fall back on. We might test the waters and say something like, I wonder if there's another way that we could look at this, but we're more likely to go along in order to keep everyone comfortable. We'll stay quiet when things that we disagree with come up, or we find ways to redirect the conversation towards safer topics. The 9s treat group harmony like this fragile ecosystem that really requires careful management. And usually we need to be the ones to lower ourselves in order to maintain the group's harmony. A 4 just can't stay quiet when something feels inauthentic, even if it makes other people feel uncomfortable. This impulse to express themselves authentically is stronger than their need for harmony. So when everyone is agreeing with something that feels wrong or incomplete, then the 4 experiences like consensus as a kind of suffocation of their identity. They're not trying to be difficult or contrary, and they'll say something like, I see it differently, and here's why. Or actually, no, that hasn't been my experience. Or I think we're missing something important here. So the 4 would rather risk being seen as the odd one or the one that is creating drama than participate in a situation that feels like self-deception. So now you probably know which one you are. And if you found yourself thinking about how to maintain harmony and avoid disrupting a group, then likely you're leaning towards a 9. If you found yourself unable to stay quiet when something felt wrong or incomplete, you're probably leaning towards a 4. But knowing your type is just the beginning. And if you want a further exploration of this with fantasy world dynamics, you can check out these 2 videos over here to get a deeper understanding.